Welcome to another weekly featured business brought to you by Visibility Impact and your host, James Moffat, where he will gracefully take our featured guest on a personal and business journey and stories that will inspire, educate, and engage you.
Hello, and welcome to another Friday Featured Business brought to you by Visibility Impact and your host, myself, James Moffat. Today, we have our 119th guest, and we're going to take our guest, who's going to introduce herself in a minute, on a journey from her childhood to where she is now. So welcome, Jeannine. Welcome to the show, and please introduce your name, your full name, because I'm going to screw that up. And where are you living now? And where are you originally from?
Thank you, James. It's an honor to be a guest on your show. My name is Jeannine Rashidi. I currently live in San Jose, California. I was born in Riverside, California. So California, born and raised.
Excellent. So I have been to California. I actually worked for a company in Santa Barbara.
Oh, well, when we get to that part of the story, I actually had spent some time in Santa Barbara.
Yeah, I mean, they were in State Street, so that main street coming up from the pier.
I know exactly where that is.
So pretty much halfway up, or near the top end, actually, and on the left-hand side coming up.
Okay.
Anyway, so I spent a lot of time in Santa Barbara, Santa Cruz, and around that area. And then I worked for other companies, just digressing a little bit, all over California. So in the Bay Area, in Silicon Valley, I mean, in Redwood City, San Jose. And yeah, I love the Californian coastal highway.
Oh, it's beautiful.
And you have to have a muscle car when you drive down there.
It's a must.
Yeah, I mean, we used to go... I'm sorry to just digress a bit, but I love California. And yeah, we used to go to sales meetings. So we used to fly over there, either to LA or to San Francisco, and then hire cars. And I would hire the car before I got there. And when I got there, they gave me a Nissan. I said, I don't want a Nissan. I hired a Mustang. And they said, yeah, but it says, or equivalent. I said, how can a Nissan be equivalent to a Mustang? Right? And they said, well, it's in the same group. And I said, no. And I had to fight hard to get the Mustang. But then there's nothing better than driving a Mustang down the California Coastal Highway. But anyway.
That's great. Sounds like you had a good time.
I loved it. I loved going there. I mean, everywhere. It's beautiful. So you grew up in where is Riverside then? Where's that near?
So Riverside is in Southern California. It's known as one of the cities of the Inland Empire. So it's closer to the desert. Not much going on there. In fact, I call it the meth capital of the world. There's a lot of drug use and things like that there. And that's actually part of, what I came out of as far as my parents. But my, grandparents, they settled there. They built a home there, and they're no longer with us.
Right. So let's take you on a journey then. So how long have you lived now? So you're in Santa Cruz?
San Jose.
Oh, San Jose.
Yeah.
Okay. So how long have you been there?
Well, so I moved up here twice. When I was about 11, my parents moved us up here near Mountain View. And then I ran away from home when I was 15, which is what took me down to Santa Barbara. But then I settled here about 20 years ago. So
Okay.
my office is here in the adjoining city, Santa Clara. And yeah, this is where all my friends are, some family.
Excellent. So let's just take you back a little bit then, because I'm interested in that story that you've just alluded to, running away. Right. But before we get there, let's just kind of go back a little bit. So growing up, I mean, have you got any siblings?
Yes, I am the eldest of 5.
Wow. The eldest of 5?
the eldest. Yes.
Right. So, I mean, you don't look so old. So, I mean, you must have young siblings.
That's true. So I turned 45 this year. I'm the eldest of five. I have two daughters of my own, and they are both married and have their own children. So I'm also a grandmother of four.
Wow, grandma at 45.
Yep.
Right. Okay. Yeah. I mean, I could talk about like my family as well. We kind of skipped a generation with kids, and my kids are younger than my sister's son's kids. Right. So it's like a whole generation skip. So she became a grandma at 35.
Oh, wow.
Unbelievable.
Yeah.
But that's another story. So
Yep.
they're married with kids. So you got two daughters and they're married with kids.
Yep.
And I think there's another story there that they had kids at the same time.
Just about. In fact, I will share that story because two of my granddaughters, each born to each daughter, were born 5 hours apart from each other,
But in different locations.
different locations.
So you had to go to both.
So, well, because of technology, thank goodness, I was with my youngest who was having her first, and I was in the delivery room. And then I was on FaceTime with the other one who was in, so the youngest daughter was in Washington, and the eldest daughter was here near San Jose. And I was on FaceTime with her as she was in labor.
Wow.
Yep.
They plan to have kids at the same time.
It was not planned, at least not consciously, but something had a plan, I think.
Did they? I believe in serendipity, not
Yes,
coincidence.
definitely.
And did they get married on the same day?
No, they did not. That was the only the only moment that I'm aware of where it had worked out that way.
But there must have been nothing on TV that day.
Right.
Across the whole of the States, right? Okay. So anyway, so growing up as a kid, I just want to learn a little bit about you. So things that you liked or disliked.
Well, I had a passion for arts and crafts as well as music and as well as storytelling. So my grandmother, she's the one who inspired storytelling, and I believe she handed the baton off to me, especially when she passed a couple years ago. And so growing up, my parents, they were not healthy. You know, they were drug addicts, addicted to methamphetamines. And unfortunately, I developed post-traumatic stress disorder from the first 25 years of my life, experiencing physical, mental, emotional, psychological, and sexual abuse. So my outlets of escape, so to speak, were through the stories that my grandmother would tell me about gnomes and fairy tale creatures. To this day, I love gnomes. So anybody who knows me, they'll usually buy me something that has to do with a gnome. I also really enjoyed music because, again, it was an outlet. It gave me a way of expression. And I believe that my music teachers and, well, actually, most of my teachers in school suspected what was going on at home. And so they took me under their wing. And so I learned how to play the violin. That was the instrument that my mother played. And she was so good at that instrument. And so I learned how to play that. And then my music teacher, she asked me if I would be willing to learn how to play the electric bass. And I agreed. I learned how to, read treble clef and learned how to play that. And what that did was the more I was involved in school, the less I was at home. So that was reducing the level of involvement in an abusive environment. After that, she asked me if I would learn how to play the upright bass in the orchestra. So I had multiple talents. I also was in choir. I was on the dance team, anything extracurricular. I was on the volleyball team. Mainly it was school that, I dove into.
Yeah. I mean, there's a lot there to kind of digest. I mean, so you didn't particularly like home life?
No, not particularly.
And the teachers could sense that.
Yeah.
But I guess in those days, I grew up in the UK, and very, very similar to the story that you're sharing. kind of what happened at home stayed at home.
Yeah.
Nobody talked about it. And you were a different character once you left home. You put on a different face. And
Yes.
normally the brave kind of, yeah, everything's okay, smiley, kind of a different person. And people would never know.
Yep.
And you'd make an excuse up if you saw any kind of physical harm. You would make an excuse, I fell down the stairs, or I had an accident of some sort, just to hide the fact that what was happening. So was that similar then for you?
Yes, quite similar.
So quite
And I think
traumatic.
yeah, and I think the problem with that mindset is once you finally do speak out about it, it seems like it's coming out of left field. So I appreciate that nowadays people are more vocal. There's more forums, to, basically speak about it so that we can highlight the fact that this happens in many, families, not all families, thank goodness, but the more we can, shine light on the topic, the better, so that when it's happening, people feel like they can reach out and have a voice.
Absolutely. I had a guest from the UK that, I mean, she is quite an activist, and she's always trying to get her voice heard, but with the politicians as well in the UK. And because of what happened to her, I mean, she was abused as a child, and not just by her own family, but also other friends of the family and others that just seem to be pass her around to be abused. And yeah, and now the awareness then, I mean, as I said, like what stays at home, what happens at home stays at home. But now there is much more of an awareness, and more people are talking about it. And actually more people are coming out talking about kind of the traumas that they've never got rid of. They've kind
Yes.
of carried it all their life. And it's about time to kind of deal with it and get rid of it, because it will stay with you all the time otherwise.
That's so true. And that's actually what propelled me to open up my practice. And that's actually my focus, is helping people loosen up those impressions of trauma that are still sitting there physically, mentally, emotionally, and digestively, so that they can come back into a state of wholeness and not disconnect, which happens between the heart and mind when you have an experience that is more than your mind, body, and heart can process.
No, exactly. So you mentioned about your grandma telling stories, right? And gnomes. I mean, I see here there's lots of houses that have garden gnomes in them. So many that the whole garden is full of them. Are you one of these people?
I do see that at some point. Like right now, I rent a room from my best friend, so I don't have much of a garden space yet. But when I do have that space, I fully intend to make it the most magical looking garden, so that when the grandkids come, it feels like you're stepping into, a fairy tale scene.
Exactly. But with the stories, I mean, the stories were around gnomes that your grandma shared.
Yeah.
All right. So with your kids, did you do storytelling with your kids?
I did not do as much storytelling as a mother. I read to them, but my storytelling ability had not blossomed yet. And there was also a lot of survival and trauma that I, basically carried with me or experienced as a mom. So unfortunately, my daughters didn't get to experience much of that from me. However, my grandmother was still alive, so they got to experience it from her directly. And now I am, passing it on with the grandchildren.
Yeah. Excellent. Because the reason why I mention that, I mean, I have 3 kids, and I remember like my mum reading bedtime stories when I was a kid, and they were so memorable. I loved going to bed for the stories.
Yeah.
Whereas having kids, once my eldest son was an age that he could understand like bedtime stories, I started reading books, kid story books. But he told me one day, he said, "Daddy, I want stories. I want different stories. I said, well, what sort of stories do you want? And he said, I want stories about me and my adventures. So,
Oh,
so that's when it all changed. And then I thought, right, okay, how can we do this? Right, because I'm reading other people's stories, which I always changed anyway, because I didn't like the ending or whatever. I just used the pictures. And sometimes I couldn't
right.
even read the text. It was so small. And with the lights low, I couldn't read it. So I'd have to make it up anyway. So then I thought I had a good imagination for stories. So I asked them, and then we kind of created our own magical books. And now we've got hundreds and hundreds of audio recordings of the bedtime stories of the kids. But we have a theme. So with stories, there's three parts: a start, middle, and an end. So we wanted to make it personal. So we called it The Marvelous Adventures of Tom, and Dudu is his fluffy bedtime rabbit, right?
How fun.
Right. And then we created our first book. And then from that, it gave us kind of the blueprint on how to do it. But when my daughter, who's a twin, who's 7 now, but when she was younger, she had a fear of everything. She wouldn't go outside. She wouldn't talk to kids. She wouldn't make any friends. And she wouldn't go to any sports. It was terrible. So we introduced bedtime storytelling with her and her twin brother. And with two of them, it was even more magical. But we introduced stories that would address fear and using a third-party character, which was Charlie, the donkey from the farm. But without going into all the details, telling the story, and she passed it on to Charlie having the fear, and she was encouraging him, everything will be okay. After that story, completely cured. Right?
Oh, I love that. That's beautiful.
And it works. So you can unlock a trapped emotion with a kid through storytelling.
You know,
And
that reminds me, there is, and you might be interested, there's a gentleman who writes for conscious stories. I think that's how you'd have to look it up. And there's one book in particular that I read on a regular basis to my grandkids. And it's about I think it's the hug that got stuck. And what it talks about, or no, it was the heart that got stuck. And it talks about our heart as if it's a factory, and how all of our hearts are connected. And if we latch on to a sticky thought, which could be fear, anger, jealousy, all of those emotions, if we latch on to that, it blocks the heart factory. And so it dims our light, which means it's now dimming the collective light. And so it's the story of how to let go of that sticky thought so that you can keep your heart essentially open. So that's one of their favorites, and that's what that reminded me of.
yeah, no, I love it. I mean, I love anything to do with this. And I mean, we could take the conversation off on a tangent and talk about this, about trapped emotions with kids. And because of that, I went into shamanic healing as well.
Oh,
And I used the pendant crystal to help relieve and to banish the trapped emotions. But we can talk about that another time. So anyway, so growing up, I think a lot of the time that people do things is because they're either also dealing with their past, their own problems, and we know firsthand what it's like. So by sharing this experience and what we've done to either deal with it or overcome it, or accept that we've got it. Acceptance is another challenge. It's easier then to help others. And I think a lot of people that kind of become coaches that don't have the personal experience and they've just read textbook coaching, they don't feel the same feeling. I'm not saying all of them, but a lot of the time it is like that. It's always good, like when someone's sharing their personal experience. So let's just carry on a bit more on the childhood. So when you played instruments, you played in an orchestra or something, and you traveled, or just for the school?
Well, it was with the school, but it was through Graham Middle School, and then later on Mountain View High School. And we were pretty good. So we traveled as a jazz band.
Wow.
And so that's where I played the electric bass. We also traveled as an orchestra. So depending on which year we traveled, I was either playing violin or upright bass. And then when it came to like the choir, we traveled as far as Hawaii for a national choir that some of us tried out for. And out of, I think, 500 people in the United States, 500 students, I was one of them. So that, that was helpful. That helped build self-esteem, lots of friendships. I still have a lot of those friends to this day. Yeah.
So do you still play?
So I actually picked up, once you learn a stringed instrument, it's pretty easy to pick up just about any stringed instrument. So about a little over a decade ago, the instrument I always truly wanted to learn was the cello. And so I bought myself a concert cello and just started playing it, and then got busy, set it aside. And just recently, for this year's birthday, I went with my boyfriend to go see the Piano Guys. And that's a cello and a piano that, play together. And I was so inspired. I went home that night and I pulled out my cello, and I'm playing it again.
Wow, excellent.
Yeah.
Are you going to play for us today?
I considered it, but I don't have my cello with me. So I apologize. Maybe another time. Yeah.
Do you sing?
I have been known to sing. It's been a while. I usually just sing in the car. So yeah.
Yeah, because we normally have a singer that kicks the show off, but she can't make it today. So yeah. I'm always looking for singers, buskers or whoever to kick the show. But all right. We had a guy who was the CEO of Geneva Airport here in Switzerland, right? So he played in an orchestra, and his story was really fascinating as well. And he traveled. He was in a German in a German orchestra, and he traveled the world. And
wow.
Yeah, I forgot what instrument he plays now, but I mean, we've had quite a few musicians. Can't even say the word, musicians on the show. Can you hear the kids in the background, by the way?
No, I did hear a bird.
A bird.
I thought that was a bird. Maybe it was a kid.
That's the kids in the background. I've got the window open, but if it disturbs, then I'll close the window.
Okay.
Right. So, yeah, we need to connect all these people together, and we could do a concert.
Right.
Yeah, that would be fun.
Like that does sound fun. I don't know if I'm concert level on a cello, but
Well, I mean, I'll run
we could keep it simple.
Online bit of fun concert.
Right.
Right. We have a singer. Right. Okay. So just moving on. So yeah, I'm always curious about. We've had lots of guests that have just broke out into song and got their instruments and started playing. So I should put that in the questionnaire next time, and then you can prepare and get your instrument.
Yeah.
Right. Okay. So moving on. So growing up as a kid, then from school, I mean, what kind of studies did you do? And then when you left school, what did you do?
So I was a straight A student, and I got a lot of validation from my teachers because I wasn't really getting any of that at home. So my drive for pretty much perfection, I was trying to, basically seek approval from my teachers. And, after school, they would create, time for me to come in, maybe help grade papers, things like that. I loved writing. For a time, I was good at math up until about geometry, and I don't know what happened there. But my passion really was to find a profession. I mean, that was the end goal, was to find a profession where I could help people. So, I was destined to, get a scholarship, possibly go to medical school. But at 15, which would have been my sophomore year, there were no classes that helped me deal with what was going on at home. So being good at school, it didn't compute how staying in the current environment, along with the education, there was a disconnect. All I could think of was, how do I get out of this situation? And so I decided to run away from home, which meant I left school because I didn't want to be found. My intention was to try and start a new life, which was very naive from a 15-year-old's perspective. But at that time, I felt that anything would be better. And so what I did was I actually hitchhiked from Mountain View, California, all the way down to Santa Barbara. And I learned how to live homeless. And I lied about my age, obviously, so that, you know, people didn't suspect that I was a runaway. I figured out where the soup kitchens were so that I could eat. I figured out how to get a tent so I could sleep in a tent on, at first it was on the beach. And then, you know, I met some Vietnam veterans who actually chose to live homeless. And what's fascinating about that is they obviously saw something in me. See, I didn't realize that I didn't know what the word trauma was. I didn't know what PTSD was, but I believe that they saw something in me that they could relate with. And so these people looked out for me. And so they showed me where they were staying. I had my own little tent there. We lived in we called it the jungle, which was basically just, I mean, where you see homeless people today trying to live. And that's actually where when I met my first husband. Now, what's interesting is that my intention was to leave home, start a new life. But if you don't deal with the trauma that you had as a child, chances are you may end up right back in the same situation, whether you intend to or not. And so what I didn't realize is, as I met this person who was 17 years my senior, so I'm 15, he's 32, and the first man to say, "I love you," well, I'm a child who didn't feel very loved. So naturally, I'm going to latch on to that. And then, of course, there was the fairy tale idea of, you know, that marriage will fix everything, you know, things like that. So what I didn't realize was that he also had an addiction problem, the same addiction that my parents had. And later on would find out that he also would basically have the same thing that happened to me, very similar, ended up happening to my own children as a result. So that relationship was about from age 15 to 25. What triggered in me the idea of something great has to change was the fact that I left home trying to change something about my life, and it ended up repeating itself. So the biggest question in my mind was, how did this happen? And I started just digging deeper. So I was able to get out of that situation. It was really challenging. It took a good couple years to figure out, how do I leave this situation, because there was domestic violence, there was sexual abuse, you know, physical, psychological, you name it. But at 25, you know, I figured out how to leave and, you know, start over. Well, I got right into therapy. I started talking about what happened to me as a kid and then what happened in this marriage. And therapists were flabbergasted, to say the least. And nobody was willing to basically take me on as a client. You know, everyone was referring me out, feeling like they were not qualified. And that was, you know, rather frustrating, because I thought, well, how am I going to get to the end of this? I don't want this recycle to repeat yet a third time. I don't want my children to end up in relationships that are abusive. I need to figure this out. And so this has been my passion for the last 20 years, is trying to figure out, how do these cycles end? And finally, I did find some alternative therapists who, I believe they called it narrative therapy, where they read back to you what you've said. This was pretty powerful, to hear my own story from a different perspective. Then I was able to be more of an observer to the situation versus being in it. So, you know, I would say it was probably about 18, 19 years ago, where this idea of being an observer to a story versus being enmeshed in the story came from. And that started churning, and so my observer perspective, started to wake up. And I also needed to basically find a profession at that point because I left everything behind. So I was in a vice president of marketing for a company that sold Visa and MasterCard. And I left that to start over. And what I did was I wanted a profession where I could create my own hours to be with my children, pick them up from school, etc. And so that's when I decided to become a certified massage therapist. I instantly opened up my own practice. I already had the marketing background, so that part was easy. What was interesting was that the clients that were coming, as they were receiving their body work, they were releasing emotionally on the table and just started talking about their own trauma. And I thought to myself, who am I to help these people with their trauma? I'm still trying to deal with my own. But nonetheless, the universe works in very serendipitous ways. This was clearly what I was supposed to do. And so in order to help my clients, I needed to continue working on myself. So I would find, different modalities that I either learned or became certified in to help my clients, but also was helping me in the process. So what I have found now, here 20 years later, is if I don't continually work on myself, my ability to guide another client is limited to how much work I've done with myself. So it's beautiful. Yes, I'm assisting my client, but my client inadvertently is also assisting me. So it's this beautiful relationship that develops. And at some point, I had severe, medical issues as a result of the trauma that I had gone through. Like I said, I had post-traumatic stress disorder. So I also had like anxiety, depression, but I also came from, unhealthy eating habits and things like that. So I was morbidly obese. I was 240 pounds, hypertensive, borderline diabetic. My daughters were in softball and t-ball, and I couldn't even run around the bases with them. So I needed to work on every aspect of my health. Now, what was interesting was as I began losing weight, the memories of how that weight came on in the first place would start coming up. So now here I have I'm already, having triggers from a post-traumatic, state of mind, but now I'm also remembering how the weight came on in the first place from stuffing, emotions and things like that. So I took my body on an incredible journey, and hopefully people don't have to do it like I did. But I went from one extreme of morbidly obese to what the medical chart said I should be, which was, I lost about 100 pounds almost, went down to 145. And I felt even more ill at that weight than I did at the larger weight. So what I did was I completely depleted my system. I had adrenal fatigue. My anxiety was at an all-time high. Menstrual cycles were all messed up, and I had migraines that I would get, 3 to 4 times a month that would last 3 to 4 days at a time. So this, obviously affected my practice as well. And at some point, it finally took its toll. And I did figure out where my middle ground is. So something I've learned about my own personality is that it needs to find the two ends of the spectrum in order to figure out where's the middle. Now, I don't recommend that you have to find the extremes every time, but this is what I've, discovered about myself. So when it came to my own weight, I had to be comfortable with putting weight back on, to be healthier. But what happened was at some point, my system just said enough. And I had an episode where I passed out. And the medical doctors couldn't figure out what happened. There was no sign of seizure. There was no sign of a stroke. I had a out-of-body experience where when I passed out, I could see myself passed out on the floor. I was married at the time, so I could see my husband trying to help me. And when you, at least here in the West, if you dare to say something like that, you're probably going to be sent up to the psych ward. So I realized this rather quickly and did not finish sharing that story when I, went into the doctors, but they basically diagnosed me as having a spell. And I thought, well, here I am in a Western medical facility and they're diagnosing me with a spell. And I thought, well, do I need a witch doctor then? And so I, through some divine messaging, I had a dream that night after the episode had happened where I was in India. I had never been to India. And I went into a cave and there was a yogi sitting there. And he said, the only way to heal yourself is through Ayurveda. So I woke up and I looked up the nearest Ayurvedic clinic. And that's where I met my current teacher, Dr. Jayarajan Kodikanath. And he sat in front of me for 90 minutes, did a full assessment, and he said, I have a plan for you. And I was fascinated because there were no fancy machines. He did, he looked at my tongue, my eyes, my nails, asked me a bunch of questions, and I trusted this person. So I left the session and it was connected to an academy. So I signed up for classes just trying to figure out what's going on with my own mind-body system. And everything that I've learned, I've been able to bring back into my practice, which, is really a blessing. So I was excited about what I was learning. I was bringing it back and, telling my clients about it. And, one thing led to another, and I just kept up with that education. And here I am today finishing up my doctorate. So I'll be a doctor of Ayurveda. But what that whole science has taught me is how to live a more healthy and balanced life, looking at food, water, breath, and perception. So I've been able to bring that into my practice. My passion really has been about trauma, obviously. So my specialty as a doctor of Ayurveda is in the mind. And from my own experiences of trauma, when something happens that is more than our mind body can handle, a disconnect happens. And that part of us is still active, the disconnected part. And that's usually the part that's unconscious, coming through our subconscious tendencies and behaviors. And what I found was, as I looked deeper within and used some of the modalities that I had learned, my inner child, basically the part that had gone through all these experiences. And when I say inner child, it doesn't have to be a child age. It can be any part of you that is less evolved, resolved, etc. And I found that there were all these parts of me that were fragmented or disconnected. And that prevented me from feeling like I had a connection in my heart that was safe. Because there was this little wounded one, all these different parts of her that were just out and scattered, wondering, hey, where's home? I don't have a sense of home. I've disconnected here. Yeah, okay, the adult version is going on and living her life, but hey, what about us? And that's when I really dove into figuring out how do I bridge the gap and come back into alignment and integration with myself. And so that's what I offer clients now. And that's actually how the Adhere process was created, was over the last 20 years, just looking at how do I converse with people? What are the questions that are naturally erupting within me that I'm asking? And the name for the process didn't come till a couple years ago. And I woke up at 3 a.m. and it came to me, and it's an acronym for explore, discover, heal, integrate, and relate. And those are the 5 steps when it comes to coming back into integration with parts of you that, were disconnected. So my passion really is to create a revolution in how we relate harmoniously between the heart and mind after the disconnect from trauma.
Wow. There's a lot there to absorb.
Yeah.
I don't know where to start with questions because I have lots of questions to ask you. So I'm going to jump backwards and forwards a bit just to kind of fill in some of the gaps. But I
Sure.
mean, I absolutely love your story, and I could take this show on for hours more asking questions, but we don't have that luxury. But for sure, need to get you back on the show with a panel to talk about these things, because these are things that really resonate with me. And I think there's lots of people that suffer from this and they park it and kind of get on with their life, but it's always niggling in the background until something else triggers it off again. So yeah, I just want to ask, like, kind of just filling in some gaps, right? So when you ran away from home, I mean, because you mentioned that you have siblings as well. So, and you were the eldest. I mean, 15 at the time, so obviously they're pretty young. I mean, did you say you were going to run away? I mean, did anyone want to come with you, or how did it get to a point that it's just unbearable at home that I'm going? So you kind of planned it, or was it a spur of the moment, go and see what happens?
So I had made multiple attempts before to leave home and, would like go to a friend's house. But then the cops would get called and eventually they'd figure out where I was. And then so I learned that, oh, okay, if you get caught, you have to go home. If I'm local, they're going to find me. Therefore, I need to go farther. If I told my siblings, I knew that my parents could get the information out of them. I also knew that there was no way that I could possibly continue to take care of my siblings, which that was obviously my job, growing up in that type of environment. So it was a really hard decision because I didn't know if I would ever see them again. So I remember waking up every morning crying, missing them. But it just, it did not seem like an option to, bring siblings along anyway.
And when you did go, I mean, you said, I mean, you got married at 25 and you met
Oh, no,
your,
actually, I got married at 17 and I stayed with him till I
oh,
was
sorry.
25. Yeah.
Right. So married at 17. So 2 years later, you got married and you were away or in that relationship for 10 years.
Yeah.
And, but at any point, did you return home?
Yes, actually. So after I gave birth to my eldest, we basically I had to go back home because I was still underage. I wasn't married yet. So I had no choice because once they found out how old I was, I had to go back home. So I was there probably, I want to say I think it took 18 months before, no, that was the second time. I think it took us about 9 months before we got an apartment. But what was interesting was that I was in an abusive relationship, obviously, and then going back home. But somehow I felt at the time that, bringing my partner, who ended up being my first husband, somehow that felt safe to me, going back into the environment that I was in. Little did I realize that just, there was just a lot more drama as a
Yeah.
result of that situation. Yeah.
I mean, obviously it's quite sensitive, so I don't want to dwell on it too much, but I mean, the relationship now that you have with your parents, I mean,
I don't actually have a relationship with my parents. So I tried multiple times. And I felt that it was best if I just honored the fact that they still to this day continue to choose addiction for their life. And I don't have hard feelings. I still actually really care for my parents, but it's not healthy for me to have a relationship with them or for them to be a part of my life.
and your siblings, you have a
Most
relationship with them.
I do have a relationship with my siblings, yes.
Okay, excellent. So, yeah, it's quite traumatic. So, I mean, to have the courage to do that, but I mean, there's also too often exactly what you said. And I think this is also fundamental to the work that you do is you go from the frying pan to the fire.
Yeah.
I mean, you go from something that was abusive to something else that's abusive. And you seem to attract that. I mean, people say,
Yeah.
well, how do I seem to attract like negativity, or I attract the wrong type, or I attract, and then sometimes a reflection on what you put out to the universe, you get back. And because you're dwelling on that, the universe is answering and giving you back what you're dwelling on. And you need to reframe and refocus and change your, I mean, you said mindset, and a lot of it's your mind, and then exploring your mind further. Once you change that, you change the outlook, which changes the results.
Exactly.
So I mean, now that you're a grandma, and I mean, with your kids, I mean, your daughters, I mean, I guess you shared these stories with your kids as well. And life was different at home, because I noticed, like with my kids, I've tried not to talk about anything that's happened in the past for me. And I just focus on the positive stuff and always the good stuff. And in a way, I'm envious of what they've got that I never had. But it also makes me better knowing that I can help them with their life. And because it's really hard. And I think most people, if you take them back on that journey, they have never got over it. And I probably say that true. Part of me has never got over it and never accepted it. And although I don't focus on it, and I know how to deal with it, I think still parts of it, I'm trapped.
You know, James, I have noticed, at least with my own journey and actually with clients as well, there will be continuous layers to different topics when it comes to recovering from such events. Ideally, it's how we are perceiving the situation, right? So if we can get to a point where we are not feeling like a victim, because a victim needs a perpetrator and a perpetrator needs a victim, if we can somehow rise above that label so that we can look at it from a different perspective. And part of the adhere process is being able to get so big that you're able to see your story, you know, from a different perspective. You can actually see what that part of you needed at the time. You can go in and rescue your little one, your inner child. You can give them the mother love, father love. You can be the best partner, friend, you know, whatever the archetype is, so that healing can happen. It doesn't take away the fact that abuse happened, but you're now taking responsibility for that little one. And that little one is no longer in what I call the trauma trigger time loop experience, you know, so it's continual. And the more courage that we have to look at that, the better our relationship with ourselves will be. And then the better relationships we will attract. So, you know, I'm still on the relationship journey. I'm still working on myself. What I have found is that each partner that I've had since that first one has definitely been an improvement. So as long as there is continual growth, and recognizing the blessing, like I still see my parents as a huge blessing. They taught me what not to do. My first husband showed me what not to do, right? And so each person that I encounter in life, regardless of the type of interaction, there is something to be learned there. And I feel that if we all can appreciate and learn the lesson from, you know, the people that we interact with, then we will understand ourselves even better as well. And we are continually moving, you know, in a forward and upward direction.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, we're on a continuously learning process. I mean, we never, ever stop learning. And yeah, I mean, my eldest son asks lots of questions now, being 10. And so anyway, he asked me about my dad, right? Well, I can't really tell him too much because I never really knew my real dad, but I knew my stepfather, which wasn't a pleasant guy, right? So, but anyway, my son wrote me on a piece of paper. I've got the note here. He says, well, "I feel sorry for you. You never knew your dad," and yeah, I mean, it's quite sentimental in a way that makes you think that how much you are needed by your own kids. And
Yeah.
when you don't have that for yourself, then you kind of missed it. So I kind of relived my childhood through them. So all the things that they do, I mean, I get involved in, and it's kind of reliving what I wished I had when I was a kid. So,
And I feel I get that through my grandkids. I was still growing up as I was raising my own children. I was still deep into my, trauma and recovery. So I feel that, there was a phase I remember where when my eldest turned, I think it was 5 or 6, that's when a lot of my own memories of trauma came up. And what's sad is that I had a real hard time relating with my own 5-year-old daughter because it kept bringing up the 5-year-old in me. And that memory is so visceral for me, and if I can guide a client towards healing so that they don't have to be stuck in that for too long, then I think that's amazing. I didn't know how to reach out for help for those sorts of things at the time. So what I've done here is just taken all of the experiences that I've had and how can I transform that and make that a blessing now? How can I give and offer tools to help others so they don't have to, go through it maybe as the same way I had to.
excellent. I absolutely love your story. Now, I want to move into more about your practice and what you do, who you do it for, how you do it, where you do it, what types of programs you're doing in it. But before we go there, what is the name of the business?
It's called Goodbye Tension.
Goodbye
Relieving,
Tension.
relieving tension physically, mentally, emotionally, and digestively.
And I took a quick look, so I know a bit more about it, but I want you to share that with the audience. And feel free also to ask questions. And yeah, Zara, if you've got any questions that you want to ask as well, I want to make this interactive. So
yeah,
Jeannine,
you mentioned digestively. I'd be more interested to hear about the digestive side of things. How would you remove trauma from digestive? Do you just tell it to behave?
Well, no. So what happens is when we have those impressions of trauma or anything that throws our system out of balance, it will throw our ability to digest out of balance. So this is where the science of Ayurveda is quite powerful because, like I said, when Dr. J did his assessment of me, he looked at my tongue. Well, there's a way to look at a person's tongue and see what is going on with their system based on what they tell you. You can figure it out. So the idea is, how do you teach somebody how to live in balance, one with the circadian rhythm of their own being, which is also connected with nature, that will have an effect of your digestive system, understanding that when you sleep determines when you wake, which then will determine when your first meal comes. Now, something I learned is that if we are eating at various hours every single day and nothing is consistent, every 45 minutes is a new cycle. So if I'm eating lunch at noon one day and then at 3 p.m. another day, every single day my system's saying, oh, this must be the new cycle. There's not a consistency. So I'm not building up energy from the consistency. I'm continually starting over. So my system is not building that up. So the idea is to teach people, one, about rhythm, why timing is so important when it comes to eating, and then figuring out what are the right foods, what are the right spices to eat for that particular person, because what is good for me may not actually be good for you, depending on your basic nature or what's currently going on with the imbalances in your system.
Right. Thank you. That answers my question.
Yeah.
Wow. So tell us about the ideal clients, the typical clients that you have, and how do you do your programs? What are your programs? You mentioned briefly there, and how do you deliver them?
So my clientele varies from young children to elderly, could be male or female. Most of the time, there is some sort of trauma, whether they're aware of it or not. And I do believe that each person that, is either referred or comes through my door, that means it's meant to be. So I don't question it. Most people in the beginning of my practice came in for body work because that was my specialty. Eventually, within a couple years of doing traditional massage, I moved away from traditional massage and started doing different modalities like push therapy and yamana body rolling, because I wanted a more conscious approach. I wanted to teach people how to help themselves, not create a dependency. So the first thing I tell people is, I want to see you get better. I don't want to retain you as a client lifelong. I want to see you get better. I want you to go out into the world. If you meet somebody who could use my services, let them know, because there's enough people out there that need help. I don't need to be holding on. So I have a revolving door clientele. So some people will come in if it has to do with, just feeling like physical tension. And then through asking questions or getting to know the client, then we'll discover, oh, there's actually emotional stuff here. Oh, there's, mental stuff going on here, or there's digestive issues. So a lot of that, just happens through the conversation. Many people know now that I specialize in Ayurveda. So they're either curious, because most of my clientele either are not even aware of what it is. So there's a curiosity there. And if they are aware of what it is, then they will seek me out that way. But when I wrote my book, Abundance Beyond Trauma in 2020, that really opened the door to bringing more people in with a specific focus of healing the trauma. So after writing the book, and then COVID opening up the door for the online forum to help others, that actually attracted more clientele around the world to work on the mental and emotional piece. I can also do the digestive piece. And when it comes to the physical piece, if you're not able to come in, I can teach you online basically how to relieve your own tension, using different tools and things like that. So whether you come in because you've got digestive issues, you come in because you know that there's mental, emotional stuff. It could even be you feel stuck in life and you're just not quite sure and you'd like to, look a little deeper, or you've got the physical tension. It's all connected. So you may come in for one, I'm going to let you know about all of it and how it all connects. And, 9 times out of 10, we're doing everything. And that's the idea, is that people need to understand your gut issue actually is having an effect on your physical tension. Your mental issue is also affecting your ability to digest. It's also creating physical tension in your body. So helping people understand that we are not fragmented parts. We are a complete whole. That means we have to look at everything. So that's what I offer. And we can do it in office, online. Everything is customized. So I never know what somebody's going to bring to me. And that's what actually is the most exciting part of my day, is I have no idea who it is and what I'm going to hear. And
can I ask another question, if that's all right?
Yes. Uh-huh.
So my son had a problem with allergy to the baby powder milk I was giving him.
Okay.
And it started when he was 6 weeks old, and he kind of got the whole tummy bloated thing. And I kept going to the doctors and I wasn't getting a response. But none of that really came to light until I actually started feeding him solids. Because he had his gut lining was completely like inflamed, if you can imagine. But that's all he was eating, obviously, as a baby, because that's what we feed them as moms, until he started feeding solids. How would you handle a baby like that?
Well, that's a really good question. So the first thing to understand is whenever there's an allergy to something, that is a weakness in the immune system. So our immunity, especially, when we're in the womb, is based on, what foods, what was the environment, what was going on in your system already, what was going on with, at the moment of conception. So the seed and the ovum. So we look at all of that. So when we understand that a child now has an allergy, most of the time they were born with it, or the formula itself, depending on the source of where that came from, that also, could create a problem. So, you have to start this journey from where you're at. There would need to be many more questions to figure out specifically what was going on with your son. So I don't know if that actually answered your question or not.
Kind of. I mean, what I ended up doing eventually is cutting out this cow's milk and all cow's products, and then gradually introducing different, like ice cream. Does ice cream work? Okay, now we have a problem with ice cream. Okay, cheese seems to be all right. Why is cheese okay, but milk's not? And why is ice cream? You know, so we were sort of trying to dig down into it, and then trying different types of other milk, and eventually we realized goat's milk is fine. So, you know, begs the question as to what's in cow's milk, but we won't go into that. But it seemed to be a problem with cow's milk, and
yeah,
so just narrowed it down to.
Yeah, just to jump in there. I mean, there's the expression "breast is best." So why didn't you breastfeed?
Well, I had an elected cesarean because I have a problem with my eye.
Okay.
So the doctor said I shouldn't have a natural birth. So that was the start of it all. And then my breast milk just wasn't coming in. It wasn't, you know, they were trying to do this mixed feeding thing. And I was under a lot of pressure from the health visitor, to my mum and my sister. I kind of felt like I was bullied into bottle feeding. It's a long story, but basically, yeah, a lot of people were ganging up against me saying, if you don't feed him anything, he's going to end up in NICU, and do you want that? So that's basically kind of what happened. And I think most people will agree that bottle feeding is easier than breastfeeding, even for the baby. So he kind of started rejecting, and my milk didn't quite come in anyways. So yeah, the bottle just took over. So that's the long and short of it. I think the moment you start introducing the bottle, you're kind of stepping into muddy waters. You either have to go, right, I'm breastfeeding, it will come in eventually, we just have to wait this period out. Or if you start doing this kind of, oh, let's do this and that, you've sealed your fate. That's the kind of conclusion I reached. Yeah. Anyway.
No, sorry. Yeah, I was just going to say, sorry, to jump in, just to conclude that. Yeah, my wife, yeah, I mean, when we had we had twins, I mean, as well. So, I mean, but in saying that, I mean, she wasn't a big breasted woman, but when we had twins, I mean, they seemed to be huge, right? And anyway, but we believed in that because we believed that you get more nutrition and that bonding with your parents, with your mother. And also then the time that she didn't, you used to breastfeed, you used to express the milk, right? And then keep it in bottles, and then you could give the bottle later, but it was still her milk. And we found that, I mean, for the kids growing up, there was never a problem with that then. But anyway, sorry, Jeannine, you were going to say something?
Oh, I just wanted to add in. So while it's true, you know, breast milk is the best, there are many cases where it's just not possible, where the milk's not coming in. And to your point about the cow's milk, personal experience as well as some research, at least here in the West, our dairy and meat sources are the most contaminated. So it's not surprising. Like I can go to India and drink the cow milk straight from the cow and have no problem. I drink it here, I've got a problem. So there is something there.
Yeah. Absolutely. Just to add to that as well, I mean, we live in the countryside, and yeah, I started getting lots of stomach ache after drinking. If I had more than 2 coffees a day, I'll get terrible stomach ache because of the milk I was putting in, which was from the supermarket.
Yeah.
Right. But because we live in the countryside, there's farms. So I thought, oh, we found a bio farm. And then they started to have these machines where it's direct from the cow, and they put it in a refrigerated machine. You go there and you take your own bottle or container or whatever, and you do it yourself, right? 7 days a week it's open. So there you go there, and you can pay with cash or with a card or whatever. And it's great. So if you just want a little milk, you just buy a little milk. If you want a big container, you take a big container and you can have whatever you want. But it's fresh. And I don't have any problems. Also, the kids were noticing that with their breakfast cereal, right? They're having problems with the milk from the supermarket. But when we switched to the bio milk, then no problems. So there's definitely something that they're doing with the milk.
Yeah.
The dietitian told me he was lactose intolerant, and she could not explain how cheese was okay. And I said, well, it's obviously not lactose then, it's something else. But they couldn't put their finger on it. And so this went on for ages, and he was fine with cheese. So I just used cheese as his source of calcium and whatever else he needed for his food. And it did get to the point where I thought, well, I can't completely cut out because he'll come across it somewhere, and I want to build up this resilience. So I started introducing little bits of it now and again so that we don't have this terrible, terrible reaction. So he's got to the point now he can actually eat ice cream, you know, so we're quite happy. It's a one-off now and again. It's a little kind of, I don't know, I want to say like a surprise, but no, I don't try and give him cow's milk. It's not something that we've cut it out completely out of our diet now as a result of having him being like this. We have goat's milk, and I think what's the other one that we have? I can't remember. I have to go and look it up, almond or something. But rice milk, I was told, contains arsenic when I was trying that out. So if any parents are considering replacing milk in England, avoid rice milk for babies, because apparently the levels are too high for their physique.
Honestly, I mean, we could have this a completely separate subject, but I mean, but powdered milk, I mean, I know where it comes from. I know people that work in the factory, and I know some of the dirty secrets, right? I would keep well away, personally speaking, from any powdered milk for babies. Right. Anyway, so Jeannine, we're just going to kind of wrap this up now. So I absolutely love your story. I relate to that from my own personal experiences. I don't want to go into all the detail. We can save that for another day. For what you do to help people and the way that you do it, this method and everything I'd never heard of before, right? And I think it's absolutely fantastic and very fascinating. I'd love to learn more about it in a panel discussion. I've got in my mind from previous guests that it'd be great to have a panel discussion on well-being and quality of life and things like this, and really have a good discussion. So in closing, right, we're going to share your contact details, but what's the best way to contact you? And also about the book. We didn't go into the details about the book. How can we get hold of the book? Where's it available?
Sure. The book is available on Amazon. It's definitely available in the UK. You can get it in paperback, digital, or I also did an Audible version with my own voice. So that would be how to get a hold of the book. And it comes with a free digital workbook. So that's available for you as well. The best way to get a hold of me, you could check out goodbyetension.com, or you could also send me an email, info@goodbyetension.com. Those are probably the best ways. And then, you could follow me on social media. I do get, many messages on those different forums, whether it's Facebook, Instagram, TikTok, etc., LinkedIn. I think that's actually how you and I met, James, was LinkedIn.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Typically LinkedIn, I find my guests. It's a great platform for that. And in closing, do you have any kind of final closing words that you'd want to share with us?
I would say that you need courage for change and commitment to yourself when it comes to this journey. And the relationship with yourself is the absolute most important, because the healthier your relationship is with yourself, the healthier relationships you will attract. You will bring that, healthy blueprint, if you will, into your family environment. The family will, develop, a healthier environment. The family will go out into the community. Community will become healthier. Communities out in the world, and the world will become healthier. But it starts with our own courage to look at ourselves first. So I would encourage everyone to take that leap. And if you would like some support, guidance, or someone to hold space for you to do that, definitely reach out, and we can have, I always offer a 15-minute free consultation to make sure it's the right fit for both of us.
All right, excellent. And you can share that link as well, so people can reach out and have a call. If there's a good fit, then you can work together. Right. The other thing, which forgot what I was going to say now, but yeah, I mean, to reach out, we've got the contact details. We'll share those on the show. And yeah, I'm just going to say that you've been a fantastic and wonderful guest. I was going to say something which I completely forgotten what it is now, but not to worry, I'll remember. I definitely want you back on again in a panel discussion. And
Sure, I'd be honored.
We can open this up to something more magical. And yeah, I therefore wish you and the dicky bird on the windowsill right, a wonderful weekend. Thanks for being our 119th guest. Right. And there's some great guests that have been from California that I think you would definitely resonate with. So yeah, I want to create this forum in the way that we can start networking and get to know each other, because I'm always thinking when you're saying things that, oh yeah, you should speak to this person, that person, but at the end of the show, I completely forget about it and then don't connect the people. But there's some great people that we should start connecting as well together. So on that note, Zara, also thank you for coming in the audience and sharing more about what you're doing now, which is very relevant to the conversation today. So thank you. And Jeannine, once again, you've been a fantastic guest, and I look forward to learning more about your work. Okay.
Thank you. It was an honor to be on the show, James.
Well, the honor is mine and the privilege, I mean, to have you. And yeah, you touched on some very sensitive points, and not many people make me react in the way that I could have. So thank you for that as well.
Sure.
Okay. Thank you, everyone, and have a great weekend.
You too. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Wow, that was another Featured Business brought to you by Visibility Impact. If you'd like to be our next featured guest or learn how James Mofat can help you leverage on the art and power of interactive storytelling for your business, reach out and schedule a call now.